The night sky over Times Square shimmered with a kaleidoscope of lights, neon signs reflecting in puddles from an earlier rain. People flooded the streets from every borough, immigrants, workers, students, and dreamers, drawn together by a single historic moment. The screens towering above the city flashed in bold letters, "Zohran Mamdani wins New York mayoral election." Cheers erupted, echoing between skyscrapers. Strangers hugged, high-fived, and waved homemade banners celebrating what was more than just a political victory. It was a triumph for hope, for representation, and for every voice that had ever felt overlooked. In the crowd, quietly observing the jubilant chaos, stood Manny Pacquiao, wearing a simple jacket, a humble presence amid the celebration. Cameras occasionally caught his face, and he smiled faintly, eyes glistening with admiration. To those around him, he was a legend. To himself, he was just a man moved by another's fight. A reporter approached, notebook in hand, asking his thoughts. Manny nodded toward the stage where Mamdani stood, barely tall enough to be seen through the throngs of supporters. "This is what fighting spirit looks like. Without gloves," Manny whispered. His voice carried the weight of someone who had known struggle, defeat, and redemption firsthand. The comparison was not lost on anyone paying attention. It felt like a symbolic passing of courage from one fighter to another. One from the ring, one from the streets and neighborhoods of Queens. As the chants swelled, Mamdani gripped the microphone with both hands, taking a deep breath. For a moment, the city seemed to hold its collective breath. He began to speak, not about power or authority, but about the people who had lifted him here. The taxi drivers, teachers, small business owners, and neighbors who had believed in him long before the cameras did. And then the moment happened. The crowd grew silent, sensing the weight of his words. Manny's gaze never left the stage, and in that silence, everyone understood. This was history being made, not through spectacle, but through heart. But when the new mayor spoke, his words silenced the crowd, and Manny's reaction said it all. It was a night where hope, humility, and heroism intersected. A night that would be remembered not just for victory, but for the message it sent to millions around the world. Courage is contagious, and true leadership begins with the heart. The crowd's energy was electric, but when Zohran Mamdani lifted the microphone, a hush fell over Times Square. The screens above magnified every subtle gesture, his slightly trembling hands, the way he paused to scan the faces before him, the quiet determination in his eyes. He didn't begin with promises of policy or politics. Instead, he started with the story of every New Yorker who had shaped him long before the city's applause had lifted him onto the stage. "Tonight," he began, his voice steady but warm, "tonight is not about me. It's about every single person who has been told their name, their accent, or their background was not enough." The words resonated across the square. Parents held their children a little tighter. Teenagers with placards leaned forward, and even the street vendors selling hot dogs and pretzels stopped mid-task to listen. Every person there felt, in that moment, that Mamdani's victory belonged to them too. He spoke about his upbringing in Queens, the neighborhoods where people hustled tirelessly to make ends meet. He spoke of long nights studying in small apartments, of volunteering at local shelters, of knocking on doors to listen to neighbors' worries. He spoke with humility, acknowledging that he had never walked this journey alone. The crowd erupted with cheers at every mention of ordinary citizens, the true architects of change. Manny Pacquiao, standing near the front, watched silently, hands clasped in front of him. The legendary boxer, who had fought battles in packed arenas worldwide, understood the power of struggle. In Manny's eyes there was recognition, respect. He knew the meaning behind each word Mamdani spoke, the sacrifices, the resilience, the discipline needed to rise above expectations. This was a different kind of fight, but one that demanded the same courage he had shown in the ring. Mamdani's speech took a deeper turn. He didn't dwell on his own win. Instead, he painted a vision of New York City as a place where opportunity and dignity were not privileges for the few, but rights for all. Imagine a city where a teacher, a nurse, or a small business owner feels seen every day. A city where every child wakes up knowing they are capable of greatness because someone believes in them, he said. The crowd erupted in applause. Manny moved to tears. He paused, letting the words settle, and then delivered the line that would echo across social media for hours. Tonight is proof that hope is stronger than doubt, and belief is stronger than fear. And when we lift each other up, there is nothing we cannot achieve. Manny's reaction was subtle but powerful. He nodded, a small smile breaking across his face, his hands raising slightly in a silent salute. The crowd noticed, and whispers began to circulate. Manny Pacquiao is here. Manny Pacquiao is watching. His presence amplified the moment, signaling that this wasn't just a local victory. It was a milestone the world could recognize. Social media erupted instantly. Clips of Mamdani's speech, with Manny in the frame, began trending globally. Hashtags like Mamdani, NYC, Manny witnesses history, and hope rises flooded Twitter and Instagram. People shared screenshots of the moment Manny's eyes glistened with pride as he watched a man rise from the streets to claim history. But Mamdani, ever humble, turned the spotlight away from himself. He thanked volunteers, community organizers, his campaign team, and above all, the people who had believed in him when no one else did. This victory, he concluded, is not mine. It belongs to you. The crowd went wild. Fireworks above Times Square painted the night sky in red, blue, and gold, reflecting in the puddles along the streets. For a moment, the entire city felt united, not by politics, but by the shared human experience of struggle, hope, and resilience. Manny quietly stepped back, letting the celebration continue. He turned to a nearby reporter and whispered, "This is what true victory looks like. Not in medals or titles, but in lifting others and giving hope." It was a speech that captured hearts, a victory that felt personal to everyone present, and a moment that proved that courage, humility, and the belief in others could inspire a city, and perhaps even the world. The night after his historic win, Zoran Mamdani returned to his campaign office, exhausted but energized, the sounds of celebration still echoing from Times Square. Balloons swayed in the wind outside, confetti littered the sidewalks, and somewhere in the distance, fireworks still popped in the night sky. Yet inside there was quiet. Mamdani knew the victory was only the beginning. The true fight, the work of leadership, was still ahead. Manny Pacquiao, who had stayed to witness the post-election celebrations, approached him quietly. No cameras followed, no reporters crowded them. Manny simply stood beside the new mayor, a figure of humility and experience, and offered a simple smile. "The fight isn't over," Manny said softly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who knew struggle intimately. "But I see the heart of a champion in you. Not the kind with medals or rings, the kind that fights for people, not glory." Mamdani's eyes met Manny's, and for a moment, the noise of the city faded. Here was a man who had faced the world's toughest opponents inside a boxing ring, recognizing the battles of a politician. Mamdani realized then that leadership, like boxing, demanded resilience, courage, and discipline, but the stakes were human lives, hopes, and dreams. The next morning, the city awoke, buzzing. Social media had exploded with clips of Manny standing silently in the crowd as Mamdani gave his victory speech. Captions like, "A champion recognizes a champion," and "When greatness meets humility" were shared by thousands, inspiring people across continents. Even those who had never followed New York politics felt a spark of hope. During a press conference later that day, Mamdani spoke about his vision, not in promises or policy jargon, but in principles that anyone could understand. "Leadership is not about being the loudest in the room," he said. "It's about listening to the people who are often unheard, believing in them, and giving them the tools to rise." Reporters pressed for details on how he would tackle housing, education, and cost of living challenges. Mamdani smiled. "Those are the fights we will face," he replied. "But the first victory is building trust. When people know they are valued, then we can achieve anything together." Manny, watching from the side, later shared a message on his social media. "I have fought in arenas all over the world, but tonight I witnessed a different kind of fight. Mamdani fights for people, without gloves, without a crowd shouting, but with a heart that wins every time." By evening, videos of Manny and Mamdani walking together through the streets of Queens went viral. Some clips were short, a simple handshake, a nod of mutual respect, a quiet conversation. Others captured moments of genuine emotion, the kind that resonates more than any headline. The hashtags, "Don't you fight a spirit," "Manny witnesses history," and "Trot Heart of Leadership" trended globally. Mamdani later addressed the reporters again. "I have spent years learning from my neighbors, my teachers, and my community. Tonight I learned from a champion. Manny Pacquiao reminded me that true courage is in standing up for others, even when the world doesn't notice." The message was simple, yet profound. Leadership and heroism were not measured in titles or awards. They were measured in sacrifice, integrity, and the willingness to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. As the city slept under the glow of New York's lights, two men, one a global sports legend, one the city's newest leader, shared an understanding deeper than words. They were fighters, yes, but their arena was life itself. And in that understanding, the world saw what true courage looked like: quiet, unyielding. And for the people, morning sunlight spilled across the streets of Queens, illuminating the neighborhoods that had shaped Zohran Mamdani. He walked slowly, surrounded by a few aides, pausing to shake hands, exchange smiles, and listen. Each block held memories: the corner store where he had worked after school, the community center where he had volunteered, the parks where children played basketball and soccer, dreaming big even when the odds were stacked against them. Manny Pacquiao, invited to join him for the morning walk, trailed a few steps behind, observing quietly. The boxer, who had spent his life in the glare of stadium lights and roaring crowds, found something humbling in these quiet streets. Manny had fought battles measured in rounds and knockdowns. Mamdani fought battles measured in opportunity and justice. And now, after the historic election, those battles were intertwined. As they approached a small local cafe, a group of residents recognized Mamdani. Some had watched him knock on doors, listen to grievances, and fight tirelessly for their community. Others had seen him stand at city council meetings, speaking up for people whose voices were often ignored. Cheers went up again, softer this time but no less sincere. Mamdani paused to greet everyone, giving special attention to the young people who had campaigned alongside him. "You've already won something bigger than politics," Manny said quietly to Mamdani, gesturing toward the group. "You've won their trust." Mamdani smiled but shook his head. "It's not about winning, it's about responsibility. Every one of them deserves more than words. They deserve action." The journey to City Hall later that day felt symbolic. The streets were lined with people waving flags, holding banners that read, "Hope for All" and "Queen's Pride." Cameras from local news outlets followed the procession, but Manny stayed close to Mamdani, offering quiet guidance. "Remember," he said, "in the ring, every punch is calculated. In leadership, every decision is calculated, but the heart must always lead." Inside City Hall, Mamdani paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath. For decades, this building had represented power, sometimes distant and inaccessible. Today, he reminded himself, it represented service. Service to every citizen, every family, every struggling worker who had believed in him long before anyone else did. During a brief press interaction, Mamdani spoke with clarity and humility. "I grew up in Queens. I know the challenges people face every day. I don't have all the answers yet, but I promise to listen, to learn, and to lead with fairness and integrity." Tonight was historic, but the work begins tomorrow. Manny, standing nearby, nodded in agreement. He had seen many people rise and fall in the limelight, but Mamdani's strength came from consistency, humility, and a relentless commitment to people. "This is what champions look like outside the ring," Manny whispered to a reporter. "Not because they win, but because they lift others." The moment became a viral sensation. Clips of Mamdani walking through Queens, shaking hands, speaking to residents, and standing alongside Manny Pacquiao circulated worldwide. Headlines read, "From Queens streets to City Hall, the people's mayor, and Manny Pacquiao witnesses New York's new hero." Social media exploded with admiration for the combination of local authenticity and global inspiration. By evening, Mamdani returned to his office, tired but resolute. Manny stayed a few more minutes, sharing stories of his own struggles in the Philippines and the discipline it took to rise from poverty to global recognition. "You'll face punches," Manny said, "but if your heart stays true to your people, you'll never be knocked out." For Mamdani, the words resonated deeply. Today was a historic win. Tomorrow was a challenge. But with guidance, inspiration, and the trust of the people, he was ready to step into a new chapter, one that promised not just leadership, but hope. By the next morning, the world was already talking about Zoran Mamdani's historic victory. Social media platforms were flooded with clips of his Times Square speech, his walk through Queens, and the quiet but meaningful moments shared with Manny Pacquiao. Hashtags like Mamdani NYC, Heart of Leadership, and Manny Witnesses History trended globally. People who had never set foot in New York were captivated, not by politics, but by the story of hope, humility, and courage that Mamdani embodied. News outlets from Tokyo to London ran segments highlighting Mamdani's vision for New York. Every article mentioned the unlikely yet profound moment. Manny Pacquiao stood among the crowd, nodding silently, a living symbol of perseverance recognizing another's fight. One headline read, "From the ring to City Hall, Manny Pacquiao witnesses history in New York." Manny himself shared a post on social media that went viral within hours. His caption was simple, but every word carried weight. "I have faced the toughest opponents in my life, inside the ring and out. Tonight I saw a different kind of courage. Zoran Mamdani fights for people who are often unheard. That is the mark of a true champion." The post garnered millions of likes, shares, and comments. Fans across continents were inspired to see a champion from sports publicly acknowledging a champion in leadership, a young man whose victories were measured not by medals or accolades, but by the lives he promised to uplift. In interviews later that day, Mamdani reflected on Manny's message. "Hearing Manny Pacquiao speak about my work was humbling," he said. "It reminded me that leadership is a fight, just like boxing. But the fight isn't against people, it's against injustice, apathy, and inequality. And the only way to win is with heart, discipline, and the courage to act when no one is watching." Across New York City, the viral clips sparked conversations. Teachers shared them in classrooms, showing students what perseverance and integrity look like. Community centers screened the footage, encouraging youth to believe in their potential. Even ordinary citizens who had once felt powerless began tweeting, posting, and discussing how leadership rooted in service could transform their city. Manny, meanwhile, stayed in New York a few more days. He attended Mamdani's informal meetings with local residents, quietly observing, occasionally offering advice. "Strength is important," he said one evening, speaking to Mamdani after a community walk. "But courage, compassion, and consistency, those are what change the world." By the end of the week, the moment had become more than just a political story. It was a global message that hope and leadership are contagious, and that the actions of a single person, when guided by humility and empathy, can inspire millions. Even ordinary people began posting stories online about how they had been inspired to volunteer, help neighbors, or simply treat others with more respect, all because they had seen Manny recognize Mamdani's fight, and because they had seen Mamdani fight for them. As the sun set over the skyline, Times Square quieted down, but the impact of that night resonated far beyond the streets of New York. Manny and Mamdani had created a moment that wasn't about fame or politics, but about the enduring power of courage, heart, and action. Do you believe compassion makes a leader stronger? Share compassion in the comments below. The crowd seemed to echo, not just in New York, but across the globe. The morning after the global reaction to his victory, Zoran Mamdani arrived at City Hall for his first official press briefing as New York's new mayor. The streets outside buzzed with reporters, cameras, and supporters, all eager to hear what the city's youngest and most historic leader would say next. But Mamdani's focus wasn't on the flash of cameras or the headlines. It was on the people whose lives he had pledged to serve. Standing beside him, Manny Pacquiao offered a quiet nod of encouragement. To the world, Manny was a legendary boxer, a champion of resilience and heart. To Mamdani, he was a mentor of sorts, someone who understood what it meant to fight tirelessly for something bigger than oneself. "Remember," Manny whispered, "every decision is a punch. Every action counts, and the people are always watching." Mamdani stepped to the podium, adjusting the microphone. He looked out over the crowd, catching the faces of journalists, constituents, and supporters alike. He began with a message that was simple but powerful. "I stand here today humbled, inspired, and ready to serve. I don't have all the answers, but I do have a promise: to listen, to learn, and to act for every New Yorker, regardless of borough, background, or circumstance." He spoke of a citywide listening tour, an initiative to go door to door, neighborhood by neighborhood, to hear directly from citizens. "Before we rebuild infrastructure or launch programs, we must rebuild trust," he said. "I want every resident to know they are seen, their voices matter, and their stories will guide our decisions." The reporters asked about housing, education, and economic challenges. Mamdani answered with clarity and humility, emphasizing that change begins with dialogue, collaboration, and accountability. Leadership is not about making promises you can't keep. It's about starting with what is right and building together with honesty and heart. Manny, standing just behind the podium, watched quietly. Later, in a brief interview with a local network, he described the moment. "I've faced the toughest opponents in my life, but this man fights differently. He fights for people who cannot fight for themselves. That is the courage of a true champion." The interaction between Mamdani and Manny inspired social media posts worldwide. Video clips of Manny quietly observing, nodding, and occasionally speaking words of guidance went viral. Fans commented on the unusual but powerful mentorship, praising the blend of athletic discipline and political vision. By evening, Mamdani returned to his office to review plans for the city's listening tour. Manny stayed a few more hours, sharing personal stories from his career, how discipline, perseverance, and compassion were inseparable in achieving greatness. "Remember," he said, "it's not just about winning. It's about making the win meaningful for others." Across New York, citizens began responding with hope and excitement. Community centers reported increased volunteer interest. Schools shared his speeches in classrooms, and residents sent letters expressing gratitude for a mayor who seemed genuinely committed to understanding them. For Mamdani, the first promise was more than a campaign pledge. It was a mission to embed integrity and empathy into the foundation of his leadership. Manny's presence reinforced that courage, mentorship, and consistency could inspire not just victories, but lasting change. Would you join a movement that empowers the next generation? Comment, "I'm in," if yes, the city seemed to echo, from Times Square to the outer boroughs, as New York began its journey under a leader ready to fight for every citizen. Weeks had passed since Zohran Mamdani's historic victory, yet the energy and hope he ignited across New York were still palpable. Murals depicting him in Queens appeared overnight, reading, "Dream big, serve bigger." School children spoke of him in classrooms, and adults in local cafes debated how leadership could be about service, not status. Every corner of the city seemed infused with possibility. Manny Pacquiao returned to New York for a private visit, this time stepping beyond the public spotlight. He walked quietly beside Mamdani through neighborhoods they had both come to know well, the bustling markets, community centers, and playgrounds where children practiced dreams as if they were training for a championship. "Leadership," Manny said, breaking the silence, "is like a fight in the ring. You face challenges, some big, some invisible, but you never lose focus. You fight with heart and you fight for others." Mamdani nodded. He had learned in these weeks that politics, like boxing, required endurance, strategy, and empathy. But Manny's presence reminded him that the true measure of a leader was not how loudly one could speak, or how many policies were passed, but how deeply one could inspire, protect, and lift others. That afternoon, they stopped at a local youth center. Mamdani addressed a group of teenagers, many from underprivileged backgrounds. His words were simple, yet profoundly empowering. "I was once in your shoes. I know the weight of doubt and the sting of being overlooked. But you have a voice. You have a future, and you have the right to demand that your city listens to you." The teens hung on every word. Manny, standing beside him, added softly, "Every champion starts as a beginner. Every victory starts with hope. Never stop believing in yourself. A young girl in the audience raised her hand and asked Mamdani what it felt like to be the mayor. He smiled and said, "It's not about titles. It's about responsibility. And today I promise to use this position to fight for every one of you." The moment was captured on video, and within hours it spread across social media. People around the world shared clips of Mamdani speaking with humility, and Manny supporting him with quiet strength. Hashtags like Darn Hope Rises, Manny and Mamdani, and Leaders with Heart became global trends. Even news outlets abroad celebrated the story, not just the election, but the extraordinary combination of leadership, mentorship, and moral courage. Commentators noted that history wasn't measured solely in victories or headlines, but in the spark a leader ignited in the hearts of ordinary people. As the sun set over New York's skyline, Manny and Mamdani paused on a bridge overlooking the East River. The city's lights reflected in the water, a symbol of countless dreams converging. Manny placed a hand briefly on Mamdani's shoulder and said, "The world needs more leaders who remember where they came from, and fighters who never stop inspiring them." Mamdani looked out over the river, absorbing the weight of the moment. "Then we fight together," he said, smiling. "Not for ourselves, but for everyone who believes in a better city, a better future." In that quiet, reflective moment, it was clear. New York's victory was not just political. It was symbolic. It represented hope, courage, and the enduring power of inspiration across generations. Manny and Mamdani, two champions from different worlds, had shown that true greatness is measured not in glory, but in the lives you touch and the legacy you leave behind. If you believe leadership means lifting others, type hope in the comments.